was just reading an article in Scientific American magazine, well, the online version of it actually, and it was talking about creativity and detachment. I can't remember the name of the article or the researcher or anything about it, unfortunately. But it's basically about creativity and about how the extent to which we are, as they described it, detached from a problem, the more likely we are to be able to think of creative solutions or a greater number of solutions, which is one of the measures of creativity. And kind of the examples they were giving was, I should just say that was kind of literal detachment and also metaphorical detachment, where my interest is really lies in that. But in terms of physical detachment, that was part of the agenda as well. So an example would be, I think it was in a university in Indiana, and they asked these students to generate as many different modes of transport as possible. But they kind of contextualized that problem, if you like, that creative problem, in two ways. The first one, they said that this was a test that had been formulated in a university a long way away, somewhere in Asia. And the other group, they said it was a test that had been formulated right there in Indiana. In other words, one group of students were primed to think of it as a local problem, and the others were primed to think of it as a distant problem. And the result was that those students who thought that the problem had been generated a long way away came up with lots more solutions than the ones who thought that the problem had originated locally. And then there was a number of different ones like that, particularly in relation to kind of insight problems, not just that kind of problem where it's about quantity, but also insight problems where you have a kind of breakthrough. I'm trying to think of the particular one. It was something to do with a prisoner escaping from a tower was one of the problems they set. There's a prisoner who's locked in the tower. He has a piece of rope, but the rope is only half as long as the tower is high, so it only reaches halfway to the ground. So what the prisoner does is he divides the rope in half, ties the ends together, and then climbs down the tower. How does that happen? Now, you can only find the solution to that problem. You can't really work it out. There's no logical steps you need to go through. It's a kind of insight problem. You have to recognize that the prisoner didn't divide the rope in half by cutting it in half. He divided it in half by unraveling it, divided it in half lengthwise and tied the ends together. But again, that kind of insight problem was given to two groups of students in Indiana University, with one group primed to think that the problem originated a long way away. Again, the others primed to think it originated locally, and the same findings were discovered. That participants in the test had greater insight, were able to solve that problem, access insight much more rapidly if they thought the problem had come from a long way away, rather than being kind of constrained by feeling it had been locally generated. The logic for those, as I understand it, and I'm not completely got my head around this yet, was to do with levels of abstraction in which people approach certain problems, certain creative tasks. If a task is generated and it's perceived to be requiring a kind of local solution, so if you're in Indiana and you're asked to come up with different modes of transport, and you feel that problem is local to Indiana, it has some very specific, easily available kind of concrete answers. You know what Indiana's like if you live there. You know what kinds of modes of a transport are already available to you. So it's kind of overdetermined in a sense. Whereas if you think of it, if you're primed to think of it as coming from Asia, you don't have the same level of specificity in your knowledge. Your knowledge about modes of transport in Asia is kind of just general or abstract. An abstract knowledge like that is much more multivalent and much more generative. You can, much more generative. You can generate much more connections to it. It is a much more ambiguous, or it's much more kind of pregnant with ideas than one that comes ready-made with solutions or the beginnings of solutions. I'm not sure how that relates to insight problems, like the one I just mentioned about the rope and the prisoner. I'm assuming it's the same kind of thing. I'm assuming you can think of those problems. There's a sense in which those problems would be constrained, or your ability to imagine a wide number of solutions, albeit non-consciously, to the point where some insight is generated, which appears in your consciousness as a kind of aha moment. I imagine that ability would be constrained if not only your conscious mind, but your unconscious cognition was also constrained to looking for local solutions. So you're thinking about towers in Indiana and pieces of rope in Indiana, rather than more nebulous, multivalent, fuzzy abstractions to do with some kind of prisoner and some kind of rope, which would then fall out into all sorts of possible solutions, some of which ultimately might lead to that kind of insight. I find it fascinating, that bit of research. I'm not quite sure how it relates to the kind of things I'm thinking about, because I am kind of considering it as a kind of wondering if there's a way of applying kind of metaphorical analysis to that, as well as that kind of literal reading. So I'll have a think about that. It's just been pouring down here in Cheshire. Absolutely chucked it down about an hour ago. It only stopped about 10 minutes ago. And now it's humid and very, the air is very, it's just full of moisture really, and the ground is wet. But it's really nice out here now actually, and very rich smelling. The grass is very strong smelling right now.